Some choices are so reckless, so short-sighted, that they seem almost unbelievable until they end in tragedy. History is full of moments where a split-second decision, whether born from arrogance, thrill-seeking, or plain carelessness, spiraled into disaster. These aren't just accidents. They're cautionary tales of how ignoring common sense or underestimating danger can turn an ordinary day into a deadly one. Today, we look at 5 of the dumbest decisions ever made that cost lives and left behind stories as shocking as they are tragic. It was the 4th of July in Summerville, South Carolina. Fireworks cracked across the sky, music poured from speakers on porches, and families filled the streets with laughter and celebration. Independence Day had always been a night of joy and tradition, but for 41-year-old Alan Ray McGrew, this would be the last holiday he ever celebrated. Alan wasn't just another neighbor at the party, he was the spirit of it. Dressed in a full Uncle Sam costume, top hat, red, white, and blue suit, and a fake beard, he moved through the crowd like he owned the night. Everyone knew Alan loved the 4th of July more than anyone else, and this year was no different. He cracked jokes, danced, and pulled stunts to make people laugh. To friends and neighbors, he was the life of the celebration, the man who could make a simple block party feel like a show. As the evening wore on, Alan reached for something few in the neighborhood would dare touch, a mortar-style firework, the kind designed for professional displays. While most people stuck to sparklers or small rockets, Alan wanted a moment that everyone would remember. At first, he held the firework above his hat, posing, teasing, making it seem like just another gag. His wife Paige watched from only a few feet away, smiling, assuming he hadn't lit it yet. To her, he was just putting on a show, but he had already lit the fuse. In seconds, the firework exploded on top of his head. The blast was deafening, the crowd stunned into silence before screams broke out. Alan collapsed instantly, and though neighbors rushed to help, there was no saving him. By 11:10 p.m., he was gone. Just moments earlier, he had been dancing, laughing, and basking in the joy of a night he loved more than any other. The tragedy cut especially deep for his son, Hunter, who had only recently shared with his father the excitement of his engagement. Alan had been thrilled at the idea of welcoming a daughter-in-law into the family. Now, Hunter stood frozen in shock, forced to watch his father's final, unthinkable moments unfold before his eyes. The celebration that was supposed to bring joy now carried a memory he would never be able to escape. As news of the accident spread, the public was quick to weigh in. Many called Alan reckless, careless, even foolish. Some assumed he was heavily intoxicated. Paige pushed back against the harsh judgment. Yes, Alan had been drinking that night, but only lightly. He wasn't a reckless man, she insisted. He was simply happy, caught up in the excitement of his favorite holiday, surrounded by family and friends. To her, he wasn't defined by that one decision. He was a man who had spent his life helping others, mowing neighbors' lawns, fixing broken fences, and giving more than he ever asked for in return. A video shared online captured him dancing in his costume not long before the blast, smiling and carefree. Watching it now feels haunting. He had no idea the danger waiting seconds away. No one could have imagined how quickly laughter could collapse into horror. It was Christmas Day, 2007 in San Francisco. Families had come and gone from the San Francisco Zoo, children bundled in coats, parents tired but smiling. By 5 p.m., the gates were closing, and the animals were supposed to be settling into the calm of the night. But for 3 young men, the evening would take a turn no one could have imagined. 17-year-old Carlos Eduardo Sousa Jr. had come with his friends, 19-year-old Amritpal Dhaliwal and 23-year-old Kulbir Dhaliwal. They had walked the paths, laughed, and stopped by the Siberian tiger enclosure, home to Tatiana, a 350-pound predator who had never been considered a danger. Visitors leaned against the railing that day, pointing and whispering, some claiming the boys were shouting, waving, maybe even tossing things into the habitat. Nobody knew for certain. What everyone agreed on was that something agitated the tiger. And then, the impossible happened. Tatiana escaped. The enclosure had been considered secure. A deep moat, a nearly 12-foot wall, and years of trust that it was unbreakable. Yet somehow she got out. Some said she leapt. Others thought she climbed. Maybe the taunting triggered something primal, or maybe it was just bad luck. Whatever the cause, Tatiana broke free, and the moment she did, the night turned into chaos. Carlos was her first target. The attack was merciless, leaving him with catastrophic injuries to his head, neck, and chest. His jugular vein torn, his spine shattered. He never stood a chance. He collapsed near the enclosure, the Christmas lights in the distance flickering over a scene too brutal to comprehend. His friends ran, sprinting nearly 3 football fields to the zoo cafe, blood on their clothes, panic in their voices. They begged for help, shouted for towels, for an ambulance, for someone to save Paul, who was badly wounded. But instead of aid, the cafe doors were locked. Staff thought it was a prank, some kind of cruel joke on a holiday evening. Even when 911 calls came through at 5:08 p.m., zoo employees hesitated. The idea that a tiger had actually escaped seemed too far-fetched. Those precious minutes ticked by, the brothers desperate, Carlos already gone. When police finally arrived, they were held at the gate. 16 long minutes passed while security debated whether to let them inside. What if the tiger reached the city? The officers waited. While inside the zoo, Tatiana prowled. By the time they entered, they found her close to the brothers. She turned toward them, muscles coiled, eyes fixed. A single shot to her forehead brought her down. But the chaos didn't end there. Officers, unsure if other tigers had escaped, swept the zoo with rifles and night vision gear, moving carefully through the darkness. 18 minutes later, they confirmed the unthinkable had been real. Tatiana was the only one free, and she was dead. In the aftermath, grief settled in. Carlos's family mourned quietly, broken by a loss too sudden to process. His mother only wanted answers. She didn't speak of lawsuits, only of understanding how a boy could go to the zoo on Christmas Day and never come home. The Dhaliwal brothers lived on, but not without scars. Paul carried his wounds on his body. Kulbir carried his inside. Both would later take legal action, blaming the zoo's enclosure for being too low, too vulnerable. It was a warm Monday afternoon in 2007 in Pacoima, California. Nothing suggested tragedy was about to strike, but for 21-year-old Brandon Julius Funches and his 23-year-old girlfriend Michelle Wright, a drive that should have been forgettable turned into a story people in the neighborhood would talk about for years. The two had been together for only 3 months, though they had known each other far longer. That afternoon, they were cruising through South Los Angeles, searching for a car part, their voices raised in an argument that neighbors later said could be heard from the street. Tension filled the car. The Dodge Magnum carried them toward a crossing near San Fernando Road and Branford Street, a stretch of track that would soon become the backdrop to something almost too violent to believe. The crossing gate was already down when they arrived. Lights flashed, bells rang, and up ahead, a Metrolink train was tearing toward the intersection at nearly 80 miles per hour. Instead of waiting, Brandon swerved past 2 cars and drove straight onto the tracks. Then, to the horror of onlookers, he stopped. He parked the car squarely across the rails, positioning the passenger side, where Michelle sat, directly in the path of the oncoming train. Witnesses froze. Some shouted. A few swore they saw Brandon and Michelle still screaming at each other, their argument boiling over in the seconds before disaster. And then the train was there. 450 tons of steel smashed into the Dodge Magnum with a force that sounded like thunder splitting the air. The car crumpled instantly, shredded into flying shards of metal. Debris scattered across the crossing, pieces of the car hurtling more than a block away. A nearby truck was disabled when fragments punched straight through its engine. Some said Brandon leapt out of the car just before the impact. Others believed the train's violent strike flung him from the wreckage. Either way, he didn't survive. The debris crushed him, his body broken before rescuers could even reach him. Michelle, however, was still trapped. Her side of the car had taken the full brunt of the collision, but somehow she clung to life. First responders fought desperately with heavy tools, finally pulling her from the twisted wreck. Bloodied and dazed, she was rushed to Providence Holy Cross Medical Center in Mission Hills. In the days that followed, her words fueled more questions than answers. From her hospital bed, she told investigators she believed Brandon had done it deliberately, that he had meant to kill them both. She described the terror of seeing the train bearing down, the hopelessness of being trapped. But later, her story shifted. She claimed Brandon had only been trying to beat the train, that he hadn't meant to hurt anyone. The concussion, the trauma, it left her memory fractured, her truth uncertain. Brandon's family refused to believe he intended harm. His uncle, Michael Ashford, spoke to reporters, insisting people were wrong to call it a planned act. To him, it wasn't murder, it wasn't suicide. It was a terrible decision made in the heat of the moment, a mistake that couldn't be undone, but the police didn't see it that way. To them, the evidence was clear. The positioning of the car, the witness accounts, the argument inside moments before. Everything pointed to something intentional, a decision made in anger. The train itself never derailed. None of the 125 passengers were injured, but the devastation it left behind was staggering. A mangled car, shattered lives, and unanswered questions. In the end, Brandon was the only one who lost his life. Michelle would heal from her wounds, but the weight of that day, the noise, the crash, the memory of being trapped on the tracks would haunt her forever. His family grieved in confusion, left with more questions than answers. It was the evening of July 4th, 2025 in Houston, Texas. Fireworks echoed in the distance, lighting up the night sky above the quiet, ivy-lined streets of River Oaks, one of the city's wealthiest neighborhoods. Behind the tall hedges of a grand home on Avalon Place, 67-year-old Deborah Putzkatucci and her fiancé, 68-year-old Kevin Willis, were making final preparations for their annual Independence Day party. The couple was well known in their circle, sophisticated, warm, always eager to share fine wine and good food. For Deborah and Kevin, wine wasn't just a drink, it was a passion, a piece of their story. They had traveled the world together, France, Italy, Texas Hill Country, chasing flavors and memories. Over time, Deborah had built an impressive collection of rare Bordeaux and vintages stored in the cool, dim light of her private wine cellar. That night, as fireworks cracked overhead, the couple slipped downstairs to that cellar, a ritual that had always brought them joy. They were surrounded by bottles worth thousands, the kind of collection that takes decades to build. But they had brought something with them that night they didn't fully understand. Dry ice. Maybe it was to cool the bottles, maybe to control the humidity. Whatever the reason, it seemed harmless. After all, people use dry ice every day to keep things cold. But dry ice doesn't just melt, it transforms. It becomes carbon dioxide gas, invisible and odorless, heavier than air, and in a space as closed off as a wine cellar, that gas has only one place to go, down, pushing the oxygen out, stealing the air without a sound. Neighbors later said they noticed something strange. The house was unusually quiet. By 7 p.m., no one had heard from the couple. The laughter, the music, the chatter that usually marked Deborah and Kevin's gatherings, silence. When first responders arrived, they immediately sensed danger. A chemical heaviness in the air clung to the walls. Firefighters put on protective gear before stepping inside. Down in the cellar, they found the couple. Deborah and Kevin had collapsed side by side among the bottles they had spent years collecting. Both had been overcome by the gas before they even realized what was happening. By the time rescuers reached them, it was already too late. Lieutenant Larry Croson of the Houston Police would later explain how it happened. Dry ice, he said, can kill quietly. In a sealed room with poor ventilation, the carbon dioxide builds rapidly, undetectable until it overwhelms you. There is no smell, no taste. You don't even realize you're suffocating until your body starts to shut down. It takes minutes, just minutes, for the air to disappear. The news spread quickly through Houston's wine and food circles. Deborah, a respected lawyer and accountant, had been deeply involved in sharing her love for wine with friends. Kevin was remembered as kind, generous, the kind of man who made people feel welcome at every table. Just days before, he had spoken to a friend about plans for the following week, plans that would never happen. Their deaths left friends stunned. How could something so ordinary, so simple, become deadly? The house itself, bought by Deborah years earlier and cherished ever since, stood as a symbol of her success and resilience. Yet on that night, it became the place of her final moments. Authorities confirmed what seemed unthinkable. No foul play, no crime, just an accident. An accident caused by something many of us handle casually, never realizing the risk it carries. It was July 6th, 2025 in Indian River County, Florida. 87-year-old Frank J. Quinn, a quiet man from Vermont who had spent his life avoiding risk. He was calm, respectful, the kind of person you'd never expect to be at the center of something tragic. Yet on this day, he made a decision that would change everything. As Frank drove along the southbound lanes, he noticed something small but significant, a turtle inching its way across the highway. Most drivers would have looked past it, assuming nature would take its course. But Frank wasn't like most drivers. He cared. He couldn't stand the thought of a fragile creature being crushed beneath speeding tires. So without hesitation, he pulled onto the shoulder, stepped out of his car, and moved toward the chaos of rushing vehicles. Picture it. Cars flying by at over 70 miles per hour, the air thick with heat and danger. Yet Frank's focus was only on that turtle. He looked for a gap, for a moment of safety, and then began walking across the highway. To him, it was an act of kindness. To everyone else, it was a moment holding its breath, balanced on the edge of disaster. And then it happened. A woman in a 2020 Mazda CX-9 noticed Frank ahead. She slowed her car, trying to avoid hitting him. But behind her, barreling forward at high speed, was a 2020 Dodge 3500 pickup. Its driver, a 53-year-old man from Port St. Lucie, didn't react in time. The truck smashed into the back of the Mazda, the crash so violent it sent the SUV spinning off the road and into a fence. Metal twisted, glass shattered, but somehow the woman inside climbed out, shaken but unharmed. Frank wasn't so lucky. The pickup, still surging from the collision, kept moving forward. In the next instant, it struck him. The impact was brutal, hurling his body across the lanes until he landed on the far side of the highway. Everything he had risked, everything he had hoped to save, ended in that single second. Emergency responders arrived quickly, sirens cutting through the thick summer air, but there was nothing they could do. Frank was gone. His family, traveling nearby, had to face the unthinkable, watching the life of someone they loved so dearly end in front of them, all because he had chosen compassion over caution. Hours passed before the southbound lanes reopened. Drivers complained about the traffic jam, about being stuck in the heat, but those who had seen what happened weren't thinking about the inconvenience. They couldn't shake the image of an elderly man who gave his last act of kindness to a turtle on the highway. And the strangest part, no one even knows what happened to the turtle. Did it survive? Did it slip away unnoticed into the grass? Or was it lost in the chaos, the silent cause of a tragedy that left one life forever gone?